Welcome to choosing the right sphere. So in this video we're going to learn that the sphere is just a defining shape. The mesh topology of that sphere can vary greatly. And just for example here, we can have a UV sphere, an icosphere, and even a cube. And we'll be taking a brief look at the subdivision modifier. So let's hop over into Blender now and experience some of these firsthand. Okay, so welcome back into Blender. I have loaded up a default file. If you've still got a previous project open, do remember to save it before closing it and moving on to this. Let's start not with the cube, we'll go on to that in a moment, and we will add a mesh object in object mode that is a UV sphere. Let's take a look at that. And before we do anything else, let's boil it down to its fundamentals. How is it made up? So let's have a look over here in the operator panel. So we can see it has 32 segments. Let's play with that. Let's move it up and down. Excellent. So we can see that's changing the vertical ones, a bit like a segment of an orange. So that's a good way of remembering that. And the rings, yeah, there we go. The rings define how many are going around the surface around here in circles. So we've got our rings there and our segments coming vertically, and the rings are horizontal lines going around. Latitude and longitude, I suppose, much like the Earth. So if we boil this down to its very basics, so it can only have a minimum of 3 segments and 3 rings, we can see that's what it looks like at its simplest form. So some sort of diamond or something along those lines. And as we increase the segments, it can get very, very smooth and detailed. But you end up with a stonking great bit of geometry there. That's 64,000 faces, 130,000 triangles. So that's a pretty high def sphere. Usually you would not be modelling anywhere near that. So we'll just set that back to where it was before at 32 and 16, and we can adjust the radius here to whatever size we want. As always, I'm going to leave that at 1. So I'm going to leave that on our view. I'm going to open up the outliner here, and I'm just going to hide that sphere from view, so we can open it up again in a moment. So that's that object created. Let's now play with another type of sphere, an icosphere. So an icosphere, let's go down to the basic. So we've got subdivisions here in the operator panel. Let's turn that right down as low as it will go. Okay, so let's inspect it, let's move around, and we can see quite clearly that this is a spherical-like object that is made up of triangles. And the more triangles there are, the more detailed and more spherical it becomes. But it's always triangle, so the entire surface is completely even and divided with these triangles. However, that can cause problems with your geometry later on, because there's no defining edge loops on that, whereas with the UV sphere there is. So let's close off icosphere. So we've experienced those two. I'm just going to up that back to about 3 or 4. Yeah, that's quite high def there. We'll leave that there. So let's hide that one. And then I mentioned a cube. And most of you will probably thinking, what's this guy on? Is he off his rocker? That is not spherical. Not yet. So much like an icosphere is made up of a series of triangles, if we subdivide this cube, then we actually end up with something that's rather spherical. And this is a modifier that we'll use quite a bit later on, but I just want to hint on it now because it's a very powerful modifier, but it does come with some constraints. So if we hit the modifier tab up here in the properties pane and add a modifier of type, here we go, subdivision surface. So it's in our, gone off there, in the generate, but if we scroll down we've got subdivision surface. You can already see with it set here in the no operator panel this time, over here in the modifier panel there is a number of subdivisions. So 0 is no subdivisions, but if we subdivide once, we get a kind of spherical shape. If we bring up our icosphere, we can see it's still slightly bigger than what it was before. But however, when you subdivide a second time, and we'll hide our icosphere again, we can see it's gotten smaller. And if we subdivide again, it gets closer and closer to a sphere. Now it's a little bit wonky still, but we're almost there. And there is an operator called toSphere. I'm not going to show you that at the moment. Just want to show you that the cube can actually be a sphere using the subdivision surface. And I'll just click apply to apply the modifier to our cube. Now there is one thing to take into account whenever you subdivide an object like this. And if I hop into wireframe mode, you'll see it really clearly. So in wireframe mode, if we enable another one of these objects, you can see that those two pretty much line up with one another, but this sphere in the middle is nowhere near. In fact, I think it's about 16% too small. So if we go into view and set it to orthographic so we can make a judgment on size, a proper one, and then just move around it because it's a sphere, it doesn't actually matter which way you're viewing it from. If we decide to scale our cube, ironically, because it looks nothing like that, we can see down in the lower left the scale by which it needs to go up by is about 0.16, 0.17 in order to match the same actual size of the sphere we're working on. So there we go, there's 3 different types of sphere to rack your brain round. Now one final thing on this cube, because I've just spotted it by looking at this wireframe actually. So let's hop back over into solid mode and hop into edit. Now you'll see here in particular, and in 4 places along the top and bottom, are the remnants of it being a cube. So you can never really get away from the fact that that was a cube. You can see it straight away here that it in fact was a cube, because you've got these points joining together, but it's still spherical in shape. Now the great thing about doing this is you end up with a mesh topology that's all quads rather than all triangles, which has its benefits later on. So, I feel a challenge coming on. I would like you to choose a sphere type and make a ball. So choose your sphere type, and the way that should be guiding you is you should be thinking about the placement of finger holes. Which one of those 3 that we've just been through will enable us to equally space finger holes without causing us any problem? So try out all 3 spheres, think of about equal spacing for our finger holes. Now, according to Wikipedia, bowling ball's diameter is somewhere between 21.59 and 21.83 centimeters. Wonderful. So do pick an appropriate scale to work in, as we've done before with our pin. Finally, make that sphere, and we'll cover the finger holes next. So don't worry about making those at the moment, we'll do that in the next lecture. Pause the video now and give that a go. Okay guys, welcome back. Let's hop over into Blender. So let's think carefully about our sphere that we're working on. Well, we want equal spacing. Now we can see by looking at this sphere, which is made from our subdivision, the cube, we can see that that is not even. It does vary. Our mesh topology varies, and it gets closer and closer in funny shapes. It's not all complete squares as it goes around. It can't possibly be that, and it ends up at funny points here. So that would be no good for making our pin. So I'm going to hide that by clicking the eye over here. I can't do that because I'm not in object mode, so let's get rid of that. Let's have a look at our UV sphere. Now this is great for globes, or perhaps an eye by the looks of things, because things meet at a pole at the top and bottom. However, again, this isn't evenly spaced. If we look at some of the squares running around the middle, they're squares, and as we come up to the top, they're no longer there. So that would be a real pain to work with if we wanted even spaced stuff. So that leaves our final one, which is the icosphere. And looking at this, anywhere we want, we've got lovely segments, and it's even across its entire surface. So we will work with our icosphere. Now I'm going to work to 2.6 Blender units, and that will actually align it to the same scale that our bowling pins are at as well. So it's a 10 times scale. So let's do that now. So I'm going to scale it up evenly on all axes by, because it started at 1, I can just do 2.1, oh no, 2.6. That's right. And there we go. We have our bowling pin at times 10 of real size at 2.6. So again, it fits on our plane nice and neatly. And there we go. We've created our sphere at an appropriate scale, ready for our finger holes, which we will make in the next lecture. See you soon.